Hello everyone, and welcome to Geotab's online training. Thanks for joining us today for Tuesday's talk. This is Carrie Carter, and today I have with me Angie Milne, and Angie's going to walk us through groups and clearances and some differentiators and all there is to know.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carrie. Hi, everybody. And as Carrie mentioned, today we're actually going to go over groups and, as it says, all there is to know about groups in relation to users and reports and pretty much anything within the MyGeotab system. Okay, so just to start off, we'll just explain what groups are and what their capabilities are, essentially. So the MyGeotab software is capable of creating groups or having groups in there, which really is meant for organizing the company, not only their assets, their vehicles, but also the users as well, and being able to assign essentially what users have access to which vehicles and what rules and zones and pretty much anything within the system to define the access. So as I mentioned, they can be assigned to vehicles, users, zones, rules, report, and then basically when you're setting up the fleet, it's always good to start off to understand the organization, how their internal hierarchy is really set up, and how we can mimic that within the MyGeotab system. So it's always good to have that off the bat first before we start actually going through and creating any group structure. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the gotchas of the rules for assigning groups. And when we're looking at the groups in the MyGeotab software, you think of it as a hierarchy tree. When reviewing it, it's actually on its side. When you normally look at an organizational chart, you see it from the top and it branches down. With our system, we've done it on its side. So the company group in this screenshot is the top level, then the level below it is that company and reports level, and then so forth and so forth. So just always imagine that the tree is maybe fallen over and it's on its side, and that's where the branches are going. So when we talk about assets or vehicles or even users, they can actually be assigned to more than one group. So I could have a user that's assigned to a region, but also assigned to a specific reporting group. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. So the asset can only belong to one group in a branch of the tree, if you will. So if you see in the screenshot here, we're saying here that basically the asset cannot belong to a parent and child at the same time. So a parent being the company group that we see here with the X, and the region being the child of that. So when we talk about groups, it's basically when we see a tree, we can only be a part of one group within that level. So we see here we've got company group, below that we've got region, vehicle type, vocation. The asset could belong to region as well as vehicle type because they're on the same level, but they can't belong to anything higher than them. So when you first get into a database, you're going to have a group called company group and nothing else underneath it. So that's always going to be your top level. So the default group for an asset will be equal to that of the highest level of the user creating it. So what that means is, let's say that I'm a user and I have access to the region group only. If I add an asset and I don't define the group that I want it to be a part of, it will be a part of the region group. So it will always be that of the highest level of the user creating it. So let's talk about the initial setup. So we do have that top level company group, and we really recommend that it should be reserved for IT admin personnel, usually developers, somebody that wants access to the entire database, if you will. Children of the top level should include a company and report group. Now, when we say company, that could be the company name. So we've thrown in there, it could be ABC Company. That way, you can have your IT people as part of that top level company group. They have access to everything. And then maybe you have administrators that need to access all the vehicles and the reports as well. You can actually have them just a part of this company group, let's say ABC Company. I'll use that for the rest of this presentation. So let's say I'm an administrator, I'm supposed to be there to, administer vehicles, users, all that good stuff. You can put me in that ABC Company group and I'll have access to everything underneath it. And I'll show you an example of a structure using this to show you exactly how it'll look. So the company group, or the ABC company group, will act as the top-level group for all assets in the database. So this could be the actual company name, and the database owners who also want to receive reports could belong to the ABC company and the report group. And we'll talk about that report group in just a moment and explain kind of what we mean by the reporting and how a user can have access to that. So a fleet can be organized into different categories, if you will. So we use the ABC company group level, and the children are represented by categories such as what we see here. So location or region, vocation, department, vehicle type, any miss. So the report group should also be made to represent those various departments or users. So for instance, you could have a report group, and underneath that you could have subgroups. So you've got your supervisors, your managers, your maintenance people, your drivers as well. So really what this means is, let's say I have a report that I want to send to just the supervisors in the database, and I can set my report viewers to the supervisor group, and then all the users that have that group will actually receive that report. And that's just a little high level, but I'll explain that in a second. Do we have a question, Carrie?
No, I think we're okay. I was just going to comment on something there with for example, with the supervisors. If you have different supervisors for Group A and Group B and Group C, you only have to send that report out once to all supervisors, and they will only get their respective groups, or their respective assets. And I say that because I've seen numerous databases that have been set up that the reports have been sent to every single group at that same level, and they don't have to be. It's set up once, and it will just go to the respective level. Okay, they will only get that asset. That was all I was wanting to say. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a good point, because I've seen in some other instances in some databases where they have, let's say they've got their company group, and or let's say it's all locations, and they'll have region A, and then under region A they'll have supervisors, and then they'll have region B and they'll have supervisors, region C, supervisors. So you don't really have to duplicate that under each location or vocation or whichever you have there. You can have your separate group on the same level as your top company, and then you can have your supervisor reports group once, and then all of those users will just have to be a part of that one as well as their asset group, and everything will work properly. Okay, so here's the example of group structure that I was talking about. So you can see we've got our top level company group that's by default in the database, and then we've created this hierarchy, if you will, that follows. So we've got company. Underneath company we have department, hours of service, region, vehicle type, vocation, and then I expanded on region as well, so you can see how it further and further can go down. So region, we've got, Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, South America, and then we can even go further from there, maybe go into cities, branches, and so forth, depending on how the company flows. So you can see how flexible it is for any company, and if you're looking at this from a customer perspective and thinking about how your company is set up internally, you can kind of get an idea of how you would set it up within the Geotab system. So let's talk a little bit about users and how they relate to the groups. So users are assigned to groups for different purposes. So maybe for filtering to specific vehicles within the software, maybe allowing for emailed reports to be sent to them for their own specific location, even visibility of specific exceptions within the system, which I'll expand on. So they can actually also be assigned to groups that aren't in their data scope, and that's for the purpose of receiving reports and for filtering as well. So this allows the user to receive reports from other groups without actually having access to the assets assigned to that group. So when we go into any user in a database, they'll see that we've got their username, password, security clearances, all that stuff, and then near the bottom you can see the data access that they have, but then there's that extra spot that says additionally allow reporting by these groups. So you can see we've got data access Canada, and then we've got reports in this example. You could also have, let's say, data access for Canada, and your additional allow reporting groups could be vehicle types. So what this does is it doesn't actually give you access to the assets under that vehicle types group, if you will, but it'll allow you to filter using the top left filter in MyGeotab to filter by Canada as well as vehicle types, and you'll be able to see that data in there. And this also works for emailed reports as well. Now let's talk a little bit about drivers, because we've talked about users, but then we also have drivers. So drivers essentially are users in the system. So whenever you have a driver, it is a user in the system. And for those of you that that know the software, if you go into a user, we've got different tabs. We've got the user tab, then we have a driver tab, and then we have their options. So when we look at the driver tab, they can actually be assigned to different groups, if you will. So I'll just kind of walk through this. So rule number 1 of that group, the assigned group must be equal to or a child of the user group, if you will. So let's say the user itself is part of Canada. It has to be part of a group underneath Canada, is really what that's saying. Rule number 2, so the user when logged in will have the data scope of the user, whereas the driver will be set to their assigned group for the purpose of reports. So I think we have a little bit of an example here because it may not be as clear. It's a little bit difficult to explain this one. So here's a good example. A manager oversees Asia, Australia, and the service groups. So the manager is also tasked with driving for the service team. So not only is he a user, but he's also a driver. So when you assign the driver to the service group under his home group on the driver tab, as you can see on the bottom right screenshot, when the reports are run for drivers, because you know how you can run a report for a driver or a device, if you were to run the report for drivers, the information for this particular user will only include this person in reports that are run for service, not for Asia or Australia. I hope that makes sense, if that's clear enough. But that's essentially what the purpose of that would be. So even though he does oversee Asia and Australia, he's only really driving for the service group. So if you were to run a report by driver for the service group, he will show up in there. But if you were to run a report by driver for Asia, he would not show up in there because his driving is only for the service group. Okay, moving forward. So I talked about the filter. So when you're in MyGeotab, on the top left, we've got a spot there that says Groups Filter. So this allows users to be able to filter down, as you would imagine, to specific group levels. So they could essentially, if they're looking at a dashboard, maybe it's an administrator that actually oversees the entire company group, and they're viewing their dashboard for the entire company. If they want to filter down and say, okay, well, I want to know how this region's doing, or I want to know how this region's doing, they can go up to the group filter, and they can either type in the name of that region, or they can use the drop-down, and they can choose that region, and the dashboard will refresh, and it will show just the information for that particular group of vehicles. And it also works the same in any area of the software. So if you're running a trips report, you're only going to see those vehicles. Risk management, any report that you run will only be for what you have filtered in that groups filter. So I want to talk more about the filtering and kind of the gotchas. So when this is the difference, I guess, if you will, with our reporting. So when you're filtering to multiple groups, so let's say, for instance, we've got South America group and passenger cars, and someone goes up in the groups filter and chooses South America and passenger cars, and what they're hoping to see is, let's say if they go into the vehicles list, they're hoping to see a list of vehicles that are in the passenger group under South America, right? So they're hoping to just have South America filtered down to just the vehicles that are passenger cars. Now, the way our system works is that, and we've got a little Venn diagram at the bottom there, what it's going to show you is a list of all the vehicles that are in South America, as well as all of the vehicles that are in passenger cars, even if they're not in South America. So it's an and, if you will, if you think logically. It's both of them and not just half and half, if you will, not just a little bit of both, if that makes sense. So it's always easier to kind of throw in a little diagram there to show you what I mean. Most of the cases, let's say that middle spot there was a light green. That's where most people would think that it would be. It would be a combination of South America and passenger cars. just the passenger cars under South America, but in fact it encompasses both. All right, so let's venture into the zones world here. So when a zone is assigned to the overall company group, it's visible to all users in the system, which makes sense. So no matter what group they're part of below, because the zone is assigned to not only just the company group but everything underneath it, then everybody can see it. But that doesn't mean that they can actually edit that zone. So a zone is not accessible to edit if it belongs to the parent. So because we've got let's say in this example here, headquarters is actually part of the overall company group, and the user that's looking at the zone list is part of the Australia group only. So he can see the headquarters group, but you can see that it's grayed out, meaning that he can't actually edit or do anything to that group, or that zone, sorry. But because the home zone is in the Australia group, he can edit and make any changes to it if he wants to. So you can see when we look on the map as well, I do have visibility into that headquarters zone, but I won't be able to make any changes to the size or properties of that zone. So we go into rules similar to zones. When a rule is assigned to the company group, it affects all vehicles and users, just like I mentioned. And we've got another example here where the rule is assigned to just the service group, the bottom one that says speeding in brackets service, and you can see on the far right hand side that's the group that this rule is assigned to. The one above it, speeding in brackets global, on the far right we can see that it is assigned to the overall company group. So that means that anytime any vehicle underneath that company group breaks that rule, it'll trigger an exception. Whereas the service one, it only applies to the vehicles in the service group. So when I'm looking at this, I'm a user in that service group. I can see that there's a global rule, but I can't make any edits to it. Now, one point at the bottom here is rules that are accessible to the user can be viewed in an exception report. So that service rule can absolutely be shown in the exception report. Okay, so I touched on this a little bit with reports. So reports can be assigned to groups for various reasons. So making the reports visible to certain users or setting the data scope for the reports itself. So when we go into a report and we set it up for a dashboard or an email, we have two options of setting up the groups for it. The first option is the viewers. So this is when we go back to what I was talking about with those supervisor, manager, maintenance report groups. The viewers are the ones who can see or receive the reports. So they can either see it on the dashboard or they'll be the ones to receive those emails. The belonging to actually refers to the data that will be included in that report. So for instance, let's say I had a report that was, it's a management type of report. And it should, so basically we want to have the manager reports group. All users that are managers in the company will belong to that group as well. And I could even set the belonging to be everything, which means it would be any asset in the database. And what the report is actually going to do when it generates is it will find the user in the manager reports and say, okay, this person's in the manager reports group, and then it will look at that user's data scope. So it will only send the report for their individual data scope. So I've got a manager that's manager for region A, and he'll receive the report and he'll only get it for region A, even though I've set the belonging to be everything. In this example that we see on the screen, we've got manager reports and vans. So we've got vehicle type group and then we've got vans underneath there. So what will happen is these managers will receive the report, but they'll only receive it for the vehicles that are part of that vans group, if you will. It's a great way to be able to handle the groups or the reports, because you don't want to have to create one report for this group and one report for that group. You can have one singular report, and as long as you set up the groups properly, everyone will receive whatever they need to get. So you could have 300 people receiving this one single report, but they'll all receive it with their own particular data set. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an example here. So let's say I've got a user, he's John Smith at abc.com. his groups that he belongs to, his data scope, is supervisor reports and branch 123. And branch 123 is actually a child of region A. Now we look at the report. So we've set the viewers to be up as supervisor reports, and we set the belonging to be region A. So the belonging to is actually saying anything in region A and below. So when we look at those two things, because John Smith at abc.com is in the supervisor reports group, he will receive that report because that's what we set up as the viewers. And since the branch that he belongs to is under region A, he will also receive the report for just branch 123, which is all that he has access to. So as Carrie said, test it out. I always recommend, you can't really break anything in MyGeotab. Test it out and you'll see exactly how it works. And it's actually it's a pretty robust system when we think about it. Because when we talk about groups and people say, we can do groups, that's great, but it really ties into every single piece of the system, and it really allows your system to be customized on a per user basis. Question?
Angie, just a quick thought. Did we include a screenshot of where when you're sampling a report you can select the send to myself, the test button?
No. I can actually pop into a database and show you. Let me just exit out of this really quickly here.
I just think it would be helpful for people to see that they can test their theory before they spam the world.
Absolutely, and I always recommend that whenever I do my reporting webinars, which I'll be doing next week actually. I always recommend when you're testing reports to send it to yourself only at first and not to everybody. So if I were to go to reports, and let's say I'm just going to go to emailed reports. I don't think we have any in here right now, but let's say I want to turn on this advanced audit log on as an email. If I go here, by default it's set to not have any group selected to be the viewer, so it's telling me that no one will receive the report. But let's say this is a new custom report. I want to make sure that it works before I send it to everybody. We have an option here that says email the report to me. So if I turn on, it changes and it says only one user will receive the report. So now this will allow me to receive the report, and I can still do my asset, belonging to whichever, and it will only send me the report for the data scope that I have access to. Okay, so when we talk about clearances, this is really, it's different from groups, and this is really where you can set up users and what they have access to see as far as features within the actual software itself. So unlike groups, only one clearance can be assigned per user, which makes perfect sense when we go through it. So to see your clearances, you would go into Administration, Users, and then there's a clearance button at the top. And you can see that we have 5 default clearances available to you all that you can choose from. But we also offer the ability to create sub-clearances underneath any one of these. So our 5 defaults are Administrator, which literally has access to every single thing in the database. Then we have Supervisor, which is a little, can't do some certain things in there. Default User, Drive App User, which is more for the hours of service. View only, which, as you can imagine, just does not allow them to administer anything, but they can view anything in the system. And then we have a nothing security clearance. Nothing security clearance, the main purpose of that one would be if you have drivers in the system that you have to add as a user in the database to be able to run reports on them, but you may not actually want to give them access to the database, and if for some reason they've figured out their password and they're able to get in, they won't be able to see anything. They'll have nothing, if you will. So let's talk about some sample use cases of clearances and why you would use them. So, maybe you want to limit the capabilities of a user. So, for example, you've got a maintenance manager. He won't need to view drivers' trips on a map. He really just needs to see the maintenance information. So you can limit what access he has available to him. Maybe you've also, and this isn't part in here, maybe you've got your default users, right? So they should only be able to see their vehicles, and they should only be able to view the map. So you can actually hide everything else in the software from them. Maybe you want to remove the visibility of unused features. So, for instance, hours of service or DVIR, you want to remove that from all the users because we don't want to incur charges. Or you want to maybe prevent users from being able to edit other users. That's a big one. You know, you've got an admin user. But then you've got your overall, let's say you've got your regular admin and then you've got your IT admin, right? So we know the IT admin has access to everything, and then you've got an admin that just maybe has access to add devices or something like that. You want to prevent them from being able to edit or change options of another top-level admin user. Or, like I said, the drivers with no access. We can set a clearance level where the drivers can be created and assigned to vehicles but have no access to MyGeotab, and that would be that nothing clearance. When I talk about creating clearances, mentioned we go into administration, users, and then we click on the clearances button. Within there, we have our list of all those default clearances, and from any one of those, you can create a sub-clearance. And it all depends on the clearance that you want to make, where you would really start from. So let's say you want to make a driver clearance that only has access to a couple of features. Instead of starting from the administrator security clearance, which has access to everything, you really don't want to, because there's no unselect all button, you really don't want to have to go and unselect every single option and then only leave two. You would probably want to start from nothing and then add two, and that would be a lot easier. As you can see, when you go into any one of those default clearances, you would just click on Add Subclearance, and then it can be customized by adding with the little green checkbox or removing with the X, and it's as simple as that. And I'll actually pop into the database and show you kind of what I mean. Here's some screenshots, though, to give you an idea. So this is a subclearance, and you can see that the parent clearance is the administrator default one that we have, and we've named this new subclearance sub-admin, no HOS, no DVIR, and you can see it's now in the list of security clearances indented underneath administrator, so we know that it was created from that administrator clearance. So you can see here we've got access to everything except for administer DVIR logs, and the list continues down below, but I couldn't really fit it all in there. So I'm just going to actually pop into a database here. So you can see I go to users, and I'm just going to click on clearances, and let me just make this screen a little bit bigger. I'm just going to increase my zoom level so you guys can see. Maybe a little bit too big. Okay, so I went to administration, users, and I'm just going to click on clearances, and you can see here we've got our actually it's 6. We said 5. We've got our 6 default security clearances. So let's go with nothing. And you can see here I can't actually edit the default one, but I can add a subclearance. So I'm going to add a subclearance, and I'm going to call this view map only. Okay, so I can scroll through and I can find it if I want to, or I can search for it, which is way easier. And let's just type in map. So now you can see anything that has the name map or the word map in it, and I can choose the option that I want to see. So let's say I want to view map only, so I want to display map and track live. And all I really do is click on this red X, and it'll turn it into a green check, and now I have that feature available to me. So I can save this, and then I can go back to the security clearances list, and you can see I now have view map only underneath there. So I can actually add a new user, and I'll just do this really quickly here. Okay, my last name. I almost said my password out loud there. That would not be secure. And I'm going to give it that new view map only security clearance. So I now have it as an option in my list. And I'm just going to give access to everything for now, just for example's sake. So I'm just going to click on save. I now have my new user, and you can see I now have view map only security clearance. So you can see the security clearances off the bat when we look at all the users. I'm just going to log out and log back in to that database. And I'm going to use that new user. Okay, so what it's going to do, it's going to bring me, of course, it's going to ask me to agree to those terms and conditions, which I guess I have to say yes to. And then we'll be able to see that it actually, I'll only be able to see the live map. Sorry, I had myself muted there. So I got my end user agreement. I'm just going to accept that. And you can see here, I've got my product guide. I can't really get away from the product guide. We've kind of built that in no matter what. But you can see that I've really slimmed it down. All I can see is the live map. And you can see even when I go into the map, I can't even view trips history or anything. So we really separated out those clearances and what access you can have. So I can still see all the vehicles because my data scope was set to everything, so I can still see everything and I can view them, no problem. I just can't actually do anything. I can't click on anything to edit it, nothing.
Everything that we've just covered kind of shows us everything that there is. Don't forget that that project setup sheet will give you that all of that information that you need as far as what the clearances are. This PowerPoint presentation will be available online by the end of the week. We will also have the recording posted on geotab.com because it's wide open to everyone. That will be posted by the end of the week as well. So if you have anybody that's missed it, or if you want to review it again, because I know this is detailed stuff and it takes a little bit to get used to and to understand it. So please don't hesitate to reach out and ask any questions that you might have, and you can also download it, okay? Angie's just walking us over to the geotab.com site so you can see all of the past webinars and events and all of the training material that we have available as well.
Yep, so if you just go to geotab.com and go to resources and then training, we have our webinars, individual training videos that we have there as well, and even our dev channel. So webinars, you can see we have the session we just ran today, and next week will be reports and customization. And then below we have all the videos from ones that we've run in the past that you can view and you can also download to view later.
Angie, there is one question here, and I think it just goes, it's not really a question so much as it's a comment. If the vehicle is in, let's call it group XYZ, and the zone is in ABC, when that vehicle goes into that zone, it's not going to report that it's in that zone because it's not associated, they're not together, right?
Correct, yeah. You are correct. Unless XYZ and ABC are on the same level, they'll be able to see it, but not if they're higher up.
Yeah, and then the only other point that's made in this comment is the need to reprocess when you assign things to groups. I don't think we covered it in the deck, and maybe we can add a slide before we post it that says that when you add something to a group and you want to see it in the reporting, you have to reprocess the old data if you run it for historic data, right? Just because I put it in the group today and I look at last week, I'm not going to see that that vehicle visited that zone last week. I'd have to reprocess last week's data to make it show up in the report.
For the zones, yes. Sorry, I thought you were mentioning with the groups. And
well, just because I assigned a vehicle to a group that then visited that zone, I'm just trying to think of the case study.
Right, you are correct. Yep.
I think that's it. I'm not seeing any questions. Again, it will be posted on the geotab.com site. It is open for everyone. It should be open by the end of the week. It should be up. So please don't hesitate to download it, share it, whatever you need to do. Go watch it a few times if you need to, and reach out if you require any extra help, because we're certainly here to help you. Okay? So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us. Have a good one. Thanks. Bye-bye.